Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst, perhaps a bit unwisely, into the chaotic, slightly rancid world of medieval junk food. You're standing in the middle of a noisy market square somewhere in late 14th century Europe. The cobblestones are slick with something questionable, and every breeze brings a new, confusing aroma. Maybe it's cinnamon, or maybe it's lard that's been reheated 27 times. You're surrounded by stalls offering snacks that look familiar at first. Glance round things that might be donuts, pies that vaguely resemble meat, and candies with a suspicious sheen. But don't be fooled. These bites may be medieval, but they bite back. You reach for a warm roll, steaming and golden, and take a bite only to realize it's not bread, but fried suet mixed with fish paste, lightly dusted in ash to give it color. And surprise, the chewiness? That's gristle. You're a tourist in a time with no refrigeration, minimal food laws, and a deeply unhealthy relationship with anything sweet-spiced or fried. And the worst part? People back then loved it. They queued up for this. You, on the other hand, probably won't survive lunch, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the marketplace, careful not to slip on a stray chicken or step into a puddle that is very much not water. Children dart between stalls, shrieking with delight, clutching small bundles of fried bread wrapped in old scraps of linen. The air is thick with grease smoke and incense from a nearby chapel, an oddly unsettling mix. One vendor calls out to you, holding up something on a stick. It's brown, lumpy, steaming. He says it's batter hedgehog, which you quickly learn is just mashed beans fried in pig fat and sculpted into animal shapes. It's not cute. It's aggressively beige. And yet, people buy them in droves. Historians still argue whether these fried novelties were genuinely beloved by commoners or simply the cheapest way to avoid starvation. One fringe theory even suggests they were made to mimic the elaborate roast animals seen at noble feasts, offering the poor a parody of elite cuisine. Either way, it's crunchy, oily, and probably made 3 days ago. The next stall tempts you with fritters. Ah, finally something sweet maybe. You bite in and instantly regret it. The dough is filled with onions. Not sweet caramelized onions. Raw, aggressive, eye-watering ones, mixed with herbs and... Is that turnip? You want to gag, but a cheerful vendor smiles proudly. A nobleman ate 4 last week, he says, as if this is a Michelin review. There's a particularly strong smell coming from a kettle boiling on the ground. You peek in and see a grayish mass bobbing inside. It's panada, a popular street snack made from bread scraps, animal fat, and any leftover vegetable bits too wilted to sell. It's thick, mushy, and strangely warm in a way that suggests it's been simmering since last Tuesday. You spot a young boy selling apple slices dipped in honey finely. A reprieve. But when you bite into one, your teeth meet not a crisp apple, but a fibrous root vegetable carved into apple wedges and soaked in cheap meat. The sweetness is there, but it's misleading. So is the texture, which you'd politely describe as splintery. Still chewing your disappointment, you find a bench, really just a rock with fewer ants, and observe the bustling snack scene. Children run past with candied nuts that are actually boiled peas coated in molasses. A man sells spice wafers that turn out to be stale rye crackers brushed with animal fat and pepper. And someone offers you lemon snow, which sounds delightful until you learn it's just curdled milk flavored with vinegar and thyme. The thing is, people weren't necessarily trying to eat badly. They were trying to survive, maybe have a moment of joy between plagues. Fried foods gave energy. Spices, when you could get them, masked decay. And sweet flavors, however they were achieved, felt like magic. Especially in a world where dessert was a luxury, not a guarantee. Still, your stomach growls. Against all logic, you're actually hungry. You look around and realize you have choices. There's a man walking toward you with what looks like a meat pie the size of a squirrel. There's a woman selling what she swears are almond pastries, but you notice they've been sitting in the sun for hours. And behind you, someone is pulling something from a bubbling pot with a stick. You're about to learn that in medieval food culture, the first bite is rarely the worst. It only gets more alarming from here. You choose the pie, because of course you do. It's golden. It's hand-sized. It looks like something out of a fairy tale. You hand over a few rough coins, worn smooth and slightly sticky, and the vendor wraps it in a bit of linen that smells like both rosemary and someone's armpit. You take a bite and stop chewing almost immediately. The crust is too thick, like it was rolled out with a stone and baked in someone's emotional turmoil. It tastes like sawdust glued together with salt. But that's not the problem. The problem is the filling. It's not neat. Or, at least, not any meat you can identify. There's a gelatinous wobble to it, and something chewy that might be tendon or might be boiled onion skin. You pause and squint at the inside. Is that a feather? Historians still argue whether medieval meat pies were primarily ways to preserve food or simply methods to mask its questionable quality. The outer crust, often inedible, was called a coffin. Yes, like a dead body's box, and it wasn't. For eating. It was to protect the contents from dirt, insects, and, ironically, taste. Your pie might contain pork, or pigeon, or both. Or neither. A fringe record from a Norwich market lists one vendor selling squirrel wrapped in fish fat, peed and sold to unknowing pilgrims. So you, dear traveler, have officially joined the ranks of the brave and the slightly nauseous. You try to walk off the experience. Ahead, a vendor slices something that looks like jerky. It's dry, brittle, and nearly black. He hands you a strip. You sniff it. It smells wrong, like smoke and wet hay. You take a cautious bite and immediately regret every decision that led to this point in your life. This, you learn, is horse beef. Not beef, not horse, but something in between. Likely old oxen, boiled, smoked, and left to dry over dung-fired coals. The texture is what modern dentists would call a challenge. One bite, and your teeth feel like they're filing for divorce. The vendor assures you that noblemen used to eat this after battle. Gives strength, he says proudly. He does not elaborate on what kind of strength. Possibly spiritual. Next door, a woman offers small fried balls dusted in powder. You hesitate. She insists. They're sweetmeats, she says. You take one and pop it in. Crunchy outside, oddly tangy. Then the texture shifts into something soft, squishy, and faintly alarming. Lung, she says brightly. Boiled, mashed, and spiced, rolled in barley and fried. You nod politely while slowly backing away. See, in the medieval mind, no part of the animal was wasted. Organs, skins, gristle, tails, if it could be chewed, it was food. If it couldn't be chewed, well, they found a way. There's a surviving recipe for liver fudge, which involved mashing organs with dates and ginger. It was reportedly warming. Whatever that means. By now, your stomach feels like it's typing out a complaint in Morse code. You consider bread. Bread seems safe. So you follow a thin, hunched man who's hawking loaves out of a cart. covered with a rag that was definitely once white. The loaves are dark, dense, and heavy. You pick one up and nearly dislocate your wrist. It's more brick than food. Still, you take a bite. It's dry. Gritty, tastes vaguely of smoke, old flour, and sadness. You find something hard inside a pebble, maybe, or a piece of millstone. In medieval bakeries, contamination wasn't just common, it was expected. Milling techniques were rough and stones chipped. Poor people ate maslin bread, a mix of rye, barley, and desperation. The wealthy had white bread, but even that was often bleached with lime or chalk to make it look fancier. Historians still argue whether the presence of grit in bread was intentional to stretch supplies or simply the result of poor milling. Either way, dental records from the time show extensive wear, probably from chewing their way through gravel sandwiches like yours. In a final act of bravery, you try one more vendor. He sells cheesecakes. You perk up. Surely this is the light at the end of the tunnel. The vendor pulls a wedge from a wooden slab and hands it over. You bite. It's sour, dry, and has a pungent aftertaste of goat hair and vinegar. You blink. He smiles. It's not real cheese. He says it's curd mixed with herbs, pressed and left to age. How long? He shrugs. Long. So you stand there, chewing something that might be cheese, might be a lesson in humility, and realize you've just eaten 5 different kinds of food that would be illegal in a modern school cafeteria, and you're only on your first hour in the medieval market. There's more. There's always more. You decide, after that last unfortunate cheesecake, that sweets must be the answer. Surely dessert will save you. Even in the medieval world, there must be some joy in sugar, or at least honey. So you follow the bell-like call of a merchant yelling something about candy fruits and spice sticks, and you let hope lead you. You arrive at a small stall covered in bees. That's your first warning. The second is the sight of what looks like small candied apples, hanging from a wooden rack, except they're not apples. They're turnips, painted red with something sticky, likely molasses, and wrapped in leaves to mimic fruit. A child runs by, chewing one happily. You raise a brow. The vendor offers you a sugar plum, which turns out to be a dried fig stuffed with minced herbs, rolled in honey, and speckled with weight. Are those poppy seeds or peppercorns? You're not sure, but your tongue feels slightly numb. That's probably fine. Historians still debate what counted as dessert in the Middle Ages. Some argue anything sweet was only for nobility. Others point to the growing market stalls and fairs where candied nuts, honeyed roots, and gingerbread bricks were sold like carnival prizes. The truth is likely somewhere in between. Rich folks had refined sugar. Everyone else had dreams, honey, and oddly spicy treats. Speaking of which, you're handed a square of gingerbread. You brace yourself. It's hard, like denture cracking hard. You smell ginger, yes, but also mustard, vinegar, and something earthy like cloves and regret. You bite. You chew. You chew some more. You start to question your life choices. See, medieval gingerbread wasn't soft and cute. It was molded into religious shapes, painted with saffron, and sometimes pressed with coins for luck. Some versions contained breadcrumbs, wine, and even animal fat to hold it together. The version you've just eaten tastes like someone tried to recreate Christmas using only spices and malice. You wash it down with what looks like mead, but you're informed it's spiced pear water. A fancy way of saying fermented leftovers strained through cloth. It's warm, slightly fizzy, and tastes like a perfume someone dropped an onion into. Next to you, a monk sells holy wafers. You're intrigued. They're flat, white, and adorned with little crosses. They look edible. They smell fine. You take a bite. They taste like paper, because they basically are. Made from flour and water, baked thin and crisp. These wafers were often used during religious festivals, not for flavor, but for symbolism. Some were sprinkled with rosewater. Others, tragically, were not. You politely pretend to enjoy it, chewing the spiritual cracker while a nearby woman offers almond balls. That sounds promising until you realize they're not made of almonds but mashed beans, flavored with bitter herbs and shaped like nuts. The sweetness comes from a bit of honey smeared across, the outside with a goose feather. You're learning quickly that in the medieval snack scene, names meant nothing. Sugar flowers were onions dipped in syrup. Apple tarts might contain pears or no fruit at all. Royal custard was often made from eggs, milk, and a prayer that it wouldn't curdle. But you're not giving up. You follow a trail of children holding sticks. At the end of those sticks, something pink and fluffy looking. Could it be marshmallow? No, it's pig fat, whipped and dyed with beet juice. You don't even try it. Some boundaries, even in the name of curiosity, must remain. Instead, you glance over to a stall with small bowls of something golden. The vendor calls it angel's butter. You're intrigued. You're wary. You're exhausted. You ask what it's made of. He smiles and says, well, it's leftover milk skin mixed with honey and egg yolk. Sometimes a little ash to help. It holds shape. You nod. You walk away. Fringe food historians love pointing out how creative medieval folks were with what little they had. And yes, it's impressive if terrifying. They didn't waste. They invented. They combined. But sometimes that creativity veered into the kind of territory that makes your modern digestive system want to file a restraining order. You try one. Last sweet, a comfort, basically a sugar-coated seed. It looks innocent, pretty, even. You crunch and chip a tooth, because it's coriander, whole, wrapped in 5 layers of hardened sugar, dyed purple, and left in the sun too long. Now understand why toothache was a common medieval complaint. Also why dessert never truly caught on until much, much later. Still, as the market bells ring and children laugh, you look around and realize they're happy. They're fed. They're proud of their turnip on a stick. Maybe you just don't have the palate or the teeth for it. You're beginning to understand something deeply unsettling. In the Middle Ages, the word pie had no obligation to be either sweet or merciful. You pass another vendor offering a tray of miniature pasties. They're shaped like little birds, adorable. Until you learn they contain actual birds. Pigeon, to be exact, but not the juicy roasted kind. These ones are ground whole bones, beaks, and all mixed with herbs, left to marinate in sour wine, then wrapped in suet and baked until the crust blackens slightly around the edges. You're told the crunch is intentional. Historians still argue whether this approach to pie fillings was about preservation, tradition, or just the result of pure culinary chaos. What we do know is that subtlety in medieval food didn't mean delicacy. It meant surprise, sometimes horrific surprise. The wealthier classes were fond of pies that looked like swans but contained minced lamb. Or ones that burst open with live birds, yes, real ones, because who wouldn't want lunch? To fly away mid-bite? You decline the bird pie. Instead, you eye a large tart with a slightly greenish hue. Fish pie, the vendor says proudly. Good for Fridays. It contains herring, yes, and cream. And raisins. Raisins? You take a hesitant bite. It is alarming. The fish is oily, the raisins sweet, and the cream sour enough to suggest it's been out since Monday. There's also a hint of cinnamon. Your mouth is confused, your nose offended, and your stomach already filing a formal complaint. The medieval palate was built on contrast, sweet with savory, sour with spice. They loved throwing fruits into meat dishes and honey onto roasted fish. It was considered refined, complex. To you, it tastes like someone lost a bet. Nearby, a young boy eats what looks like a hand pie. You're curious until he bites in and a yellowish yolk dribbles down his chin. It's an egg pie, you're told, which is less of a quiche and more of an egg pudding packed into a crust and left out to harden slightly under the sun. No seasoning, no salt, just egg. You're beginning to lose hope. You try one more, a black pie, thick and almost tar-like, made with congealed blood, barley, and wild herbs. It's supposed to be nourishing. You take a bite and instantly feel like you're being punished for something. Fun fact, many medieval pies weren't eaten for flavor at all. They were transportation. A pie crust was like a medieval Tupperware designed to carry food without refrigeration. You weren't meant to eat the crust, but often, in poorer households, they did. It was food after all. Kind of. You look at the crust again. It's damp, gummy, and weirdly warm at the bottom. You put it down and apologize to your ancestors. You need a palate cleanser. Something simple. Something you can trust. A woman waves you over to a stand decorated with flowers. She's selling tarts of joy. That sounds hopeful. You buy one. It's small, pretty, dusted with sugar. You bite in. It's filled with mashed peas and a hint of mint. Not bad. Just deceitful. You give up on tarts for now. You turn to observe the market. A juggler tosses pomegranates into the air. Actual pomegranates, rare and likely stolen. A monk hands out wafers shaped like fish. A vendor pours hot honey over dried apples and calls it ambrosia, though the apples were likely dried on a barn roof. And through it all, the pies keep coming. Eel pies, parsnip pies, liver pies, and one curious dish called coffin pie, which contains absolutely no coffin, but might make you wish you had one nearby. Modern interpretations of medieval cuisine often romanticize its rustic charm. Wood-fired ovens, the smell of herbs. But you now know the truth. The pies were traps. The crusts were armor. The fillings were adventures. And if you weren't rich enough to afford a kitchen or staff to cook it for you, you were buying it from someone whose idea of meat included rat, squirrel, or anything that used to squeak. You lean against a wooden post, your stomach aching with confusion. A goat wanders by. You make eye contact. It seems to understand. Somewhere, a bell chimes for vespers. The crowd begins to thin. A young girl offers you a pie on a tiny plate. You shake your head and smile, backing away slowly. You've had enough. Medieval pies to last several lifetimes, and probably a few foodborne illnesses to match. You wander away from the pies, your faith in flaky pastry forever broken, and stumble into a narrow alley where the smell of smoke and meat hangs low like fog. The alley is lined with makeshift grills, flat stones balanced over glowing coals, and vendors in soot-covered aprons flip, skewers of something sizzling. You're drawn to one stall by the promise of fresh meat. That's what the hand-painted sign says. Fresh, in this case, means not frozen, because there is no freezing. And meat is a generous word. The vendor hands you a stick of charred, unidentifiable protein. It's roughly the size and shape of a flattened mouse, though you tell yourself it's probably something more respectable, like rabbit. You take a bite. It's gamey, tough, a little smoky. And there's a crunch in the middle that you choose not to investigate further. Historians still argue whether the average medieval street vendor sold actual cuts of meat or used ground scraps mixed with filler grains, fat, sometimes even breadcrumbs, or sawdust to stretch the supply. Either way, the result was usually a mystery on a stick, sold fast, hot, and unapologetically chewy. The fringe theories? Some claim alley vendors often disguised animals not allowed to be eaten like dogs or cats by grinding the meat and heavily spicing it. Others suggest the most popular mystery meat was rat, especially in large cities where pest control was theoretical at best. You finish chewing slowly, very slowly. A small boy nearby gnaws on what looks like a sausage. You raise a brow. Pig? You ask. He shrugs. Something like that. You move on. The next stall offers what the vendor calls hot kidneys, served on a piece of bark. You decline. Instead, you're intrigued by a bubbling pot of something stew-like. The vendor lifts the lid, releasing a wave of steam that smells like meat, onions, and regret. Hot meat water, he says proudly, boiled for 3 days. You accept a small wooden bowl. Inside, chunks of gristle, bits of cabbage, a few floating peas, and something gray and gelatinous that might have once been part of a cow. You sip carefully. It's not bad. It's also not good. But it's hot. And in a world where cold food often meant spoiled food, hot was comforting. Or at least reassuring. You sit on a barrel and look around. Street meat is popular. Everyone's eating it. Children with greasy faces. Men with soot-streaked hands. A nun, possibly sneaking a bite between vespers. It's fast, filling, and no one asks too many questions. Then you see a vendor selling something wrapped in leaves. Curious, you approach. It's grilled offal liver, heart, kidneys all chopped, seasoned with thyme and garlic, and rolled inside cabbage. It's called a hunter's purse. You're told it's a delicacy among peasants. You try a bite. It's earthy, metallic, chewy, but strangely satisfying, in the way only something deeply ancient and deeply fried can be. Here's the thing, meat was expensive. Really expensive. Most medieval folks didn't get much of it, and when they did, it wasn't ribeye. It was lungs, gizzards, or the bits nobles didn't want. So street food vendors made do. They chopped, mashed, seasoned, and grilled until the scraps resembled something edible. And in a world where calories mattered more than cuisine, nobody turned up their nose at intestines on a stick. Still, your modern sensibilities are reeling. You turn away and walk further down the alley, toward a flickering torchlight and the sound of sizzling fat. A heavyset man with singed eyebrows is roasting something over a spit. It's small, round, smells like chicken, you ask. Frog, he replies. You take a step back. He grins. Tastes like chicken. You take another step back. As you retreat. Someone offers you a meat pie in a cup. It's just what it sounds like. Warm meat slurry poured into a crusty bread cup. You blink. You walk faster. And finally, you reach the end of the alley. There, under an awning made of patchwork cloth, a woman sells breaded tongues. You stop. You sigh. You've had enough meat. You're starting to understand that in the medieval world, meat was a broad category. It could be fresh or dried, roasted or boiled, known or speculative. And the further you got from nobility, the stranger the cuts became. Yet somehow, the people smiled. They laughed. They licked their fingers. Maybe you're the strange one, or maybe, just maybe, some meats are better left in history. You escape the alley of mysterious meats and head toward what looks like a more respectable corner of the market. The sign hanging overhead says, in faded paint, "Good drink sold here." That sounds promising until you remember that in the Middle Ages, good was subjective, and drink didn't necessarily mean safe. You're thirsty, parched, even. After the pies and meats and chewy delights, you need something to wash it all down. There's a barrel marked small ale, fresh today. The word fresh now makes your eye twitch slightly, but you step up anyway. The ale is ladled into a wooden cup. It's cloudy. Smells faintly sour, faintly earthy, and more than faintly. Like bread gone wrong. You sip. It's not terrible. Weak, a little fizzy, slightly yeasty. It's beer, but not the kind you'd brag about. The kind of drink that tries its best. This is small beer, the go-to medieval beverage for almost everyone. It had low alcohol content, was cheap to make, and most importantly was safer than water. Because, yes, water was often more dangerous than the mystery stew you ate earlier. Wells were shallow. Rivers were communal bathtubs for people and livestock. And while historians still argue how often people actually drank water, it's clear that small beer, watered-down wine, and herbal infusions were far more common. You down the ale. The vendor beams. Want something stronger. You hesitate. He pours a darker, richer-looking brew into another cup. It smells of roasted grain, spice, and ... Raisins? Winter ale, he says. You try it. It's thicker, sharper, with an aftertaste of molasses and dust. Probably the dust is unintentional. Across the stall, someone is selling spiced milk. It's warm, curdled, and contains a generous helping of nutmeg, which does little to distract from the fact that it's essentially cheese trying to become soup. You pass. Then comes the wine. Merchant, you're handed a cup of claret, a medieval term for red wine steeped with herbs, sugar, and sometimes ground up dates. This one is sweet, heady, and deeply vinegary. You drink it politely. Wine was prized, especially among the wealthy, but poor folk drank the dregs, literally, the leftover. Mash from grape presses was watered down, re-fermented, and passed off as drinkable. It often wasn't. And then there are the flavored waters like posset, made with hot milk, curdled with ale, and seasoned with honey and breadcrumbs. Or wassail, which sounds festive, until you learn it's basically warm beer with floating apples, cloves, and the texture of regret. You move on, still parched. You spot a monk stirring something in a clay pot. He offers you a sample. 'Tis ale. With egg, he says gently, like that should mean something good. Why egg, you ask. Body, he replies, and penance. You pretend you didn't hear that. At the edge of the beverage stalls, a vendor is shouting about his miracle tonic. It's a cloudy brown liquid in tiny wooden vials, made with rosemary, elderflower, and a dash of vinegar, he says proudly. Cures bad humors. You ask what it tastes like. He replies, depends which humor you're fixing. You decline. You sit on a bench and watch people drink. Children sip from tiny cups of watered-down cider. Men pass around shared tankards of something that steams and fizzes unnaturally. A woman pours beer over stale bread and eats it with a thé and a fave. Spoon-bread sop, a common breakfast. You begin to see the pattern. No one drinks for pleasure. They drink for survival, for warmth, for energy, even to settle their stomach after some questionable pigeon pie. And oddly enough, it seems to work. People are cheerful, bellies are full, faces are flushed from drink or sun or both, and the idea of clean spring water. That's a fairy tale. Fringe records mention one noblewoman who insisted on bathing in fresh spring water twice a week, and her neighbors thought she was possessed. You look at your cup of small beer. It's warm now, slightly sour, but you drink it anyway, because it's better than medieval tap water. And honestly, after everything you've eaten, you could use the antiseptic. Your thirst temporarily quenched, if not emotionally. At least physically, you wander deeper into the market and find yourself standing before a stall stacked high with what appear to be wheels of cheese. Now here, surely, is something you recognize. Cheese, the universal comfort food. The answer to your battered palate. You pick one up. It's heavy, dense, and slightly sticky. The vendor sees your curiosity and offers you a wedge of something pale and trembling. Fresh curd, he says, from goats fed on thistle and marsh grass. You take a bite. It's sour, sharp, and somehow bitter in a way that no cheese has any right to be. The texture is chalky, but also slimy, like someone tried to make yogurt cry. You chew bravely. You nod. You swallow. You instantly regret. Let it breathe a bit, the vendor advises. You let it breathe in that you discreetly breathe out. Trying not to gag. Medieval cheese, you quickly learn, was nothing like today's neat little supermarket wedges. There were no preservatives, no temperature-controlled aging rooms, and certainly no polite cheddar. It was either painfully fresh, meaning barely curdled, or left to age and rot cellars until it developed what polite society called character and what modern noses would call a health hazard. Historians still debate whether most peasants even wanted aged cheese. Some records suggest that stronger cheeses were preferred because they lasted longer on journeys and resisted spoilage. Others point out that resistance to spoilage often meant it was already halfway there. You try another sample. This one's wrapped in bark. Yes, bark. It helps it mature, the vendor explains. Also, keeps the worms in. You blink. He says it like it's a feature, not a flaw. Some cheeses were mixed with herbs, garlic, even ashes to add depth. One popular variety among monks included crushed juniper berries and stale ale poured over the rind weekly to soften it. You move to a different table where small rounds of something grayish-blue are displayed like gemstones. The vendor gestures proudly. Ash cheese, she says. Made by burying it in coal dust for 10 days. You try to smile. You fail. You do manage one more sample. Hard, aged goat cheese cut into cubes and served with vinegar-soaked onions. It's better, sort of. It tastes like regret left out in the sun, but at least it doesn't move. And you haven't even gotten to the smelly cheeses yet. Some were so pungent, they were banned from court. Literally outlawed. A 14th century French edict forbade certain cheeses from being transported in closed carriages due to unrest among the passengers. Fringe culinary records claim one type of sheep cheese could singe nose hairs at 5 paces. You assume that's hyperbole. You also assume that your current cheese wedge may be the exact specimen they referenced. Nearby, a boy sells cheese broth, which turns out to be a sad, tepid soup of melted curds and water, served with stale bread and a boiled egg. He offers you a sip. You decline. You've seen enough. Still, the nobility loved their cheeses. The softer, the smellier, the better. They'd pair them with figs, nuts, wine-soaked dates. There was even a trend of sculpting cheese into little animals for banquets, a sort of medieval charcuterie. Zoo. You glance back at the bark-wrapped wedge still warming in your hand and realize this was once considered elite cuisine. The fact that it's now slowly leaking onto your sleeve feels symbolic. You gently set the cheese down on a nearby cart and walk away. You are officially cheesed out, and in your heart, you know something profound. Not all dairy is your friend. You leave the cheese stalls with a cautious optimism because surely, the worst is behind you. Then, as you round a corner near the edge of the marketplace, your foot lands in something. Soft. You look down. It's a discarded bowl of what appears to be pottage. Half stew, half porridge, and entirely confusing, Pottage was the medieval world's answer to, what can I do with all this? Stuff? A nearby vendor notices your misstep and waves you over. Care for a fresh bowl? He calls cheerfully, already ladling from a blackened pot that's been simmering longer than your will to live. You sit, because your legs need a break and your curiosity, despite everything, is still alive. He hands you a bowl dot. It's brown and lumpy and smells faintly of cabbage, garlic, and something smoky. You poke it with the wooden spoon and uncover peas, barley, onion skins, what might be carrot, and what might be ... turnip. You can't tell. It's all melded together into a kind of primordial stew. You take a bite. It's warm, thick, and tastes honest, not good, necessarily, but real, like something a tired mother makes with whatever's left in the pantry, and a lot of hope. Pottage was the great equalizer of medieval cuisine. Everyone ate it, peasants, monks, soldiers, even the occasional noble on a meatless fast day. It was endlessly adaptable. Throw in beans, lentils, old vegetables, stale bread, meat if you had it, herbs if you could afford them. Boil it, eat it, repeat. Historians still argue whether pottage was nutritionally adequate or just a culinary survival strategy. Some records suggest elaborate versions with nuts, dried fruits, and saffron. Others describe grim concoctions that included animal hooves, spoiled cabbage, or flour swept from the bakery floor. Your version leans toward the latter, but in a strange way, it's comforting. You can see why people clung to it. It was warm, filling, and you could eat it with one hand while swatting flies with the other. The man beside you is adding salt to his bowl. You ask where he got salt, since it was a luxury. Scraped from fish barrels, he replies. You nod. You put your spoon down. Across the square, another vendor is stirring a massive pot of white pottage, a supposedly more refined version made with almond milk, rice, and sugar. It's thick, creamy, and looks promising until you find out. It contains chopped eel. You pass. Nearby, a woman offers bean pottage with plums. She insists the sweet-salty blend is good for digestion. You take her word for it. Fringe medieval recipes even include pottages designed for specific moods. Cheerful pottage with mint and raisins, sorrowful pottage with vinegar and onions, and pottage for sleep made with lettuce and poppy water. You briefly wonder which version you're eating now. Judging by the taste, probably pottage of mild despair. Still, you finish the bowl, because even after all the mystery, meats, bird pies, and bark-wrapped cheeses, something about this bowl of chunky medieval sadness feels oddly. Rounding. You hand the bowl back. The vendor grins, revealing 3 teeth, 2 of which are definitely not his. More tomorrow, he says. You thank him and stand, belly heavy but strangely content. Not all junk food is fried. Some of it is boiled, beyond recognition, and eaten with a spoon on a chilly afternoon. And in the world of medieval street fare, pottage was the closest thing to a hug you could buy with a copper coin. You're beginning to accept that taste in the medieval world is a deeply relative concept. Still, you're hopeful. You've endured the pies, the meats, the tragic cheese. You've slurped pottage like a seasoned peasant. Now, as the sun dips lower behind crooked timber-bird rooftops, you follow the rising scent of something sweet and slightly burnt. You arrive at a table stacked with colorful treats, bright green frogs, red apples, blue stars, candy, not quite. Marzipan. You pick up a tiny pig adorably shaped, sitting on its haunches with almond eyes. You smile, and then you bite. It's dense, very dense. The almond paste is gritty, sticky, and more bitter than you expected. The food coloring, which gives it that playful hue, is likely plant-based or mineral-based. Or, if you're unlucky, metal-based. Historians still argue over how often lead-based colorants were used in decorative food. Some claim they were rare luxuries reserved for noble banquets. Others suggest that street vendors embraced them freely to draw attention. One particularly cursed manuscript includes a recipe for gold-dusted candies using powdered orpiment, which is arsenic. You slowly put down the frog. The vendor hands you a candied fruit, or so he says. It's a slice of quince, boiled in syrup and left to dry until it resembles stained glass. It's beautiful. You try a bite. The texture is chewy. The flavor, mostly sugar, with a hint of citrus and a powerful aftertaste of smoke. You learn that the syrup was often reused again and again until it thickened into something like glue. Some fruits were soaked for weeks. Others just dunked in and dusted with powdered ginger to hide the shortcuts. You try a red ball labeled rose candy. It's rosewater flavored sugar, shaped into a sphere and dusted in what might be starch or possibly chalk. It tastes like perfume. And heartbreak. Still, sweets were a big deal. Sugar, if you could afford it, was status. But honey was more common and used in everything from almond confections to boiled parsnips served as dessert. You sample a honey wafer. It cracks when you bite, flakes everywhere, and sticks to your teeth like medieval duct tape. You smile politely, chewing very slowly. At the next stall, a cheerful woman offers ginger comfits. You take one. It's about the size of a pea and smells pungent. You pop it into your mouth. The sugar coating is so hard you feel your jaw click. Inside is a chunk of raw ginger. No candying, no compromise. Just spice and violence. The idea of a comfit was to take a small seed fennel, coriander, or in your case, weaponized ginger and coat it in dozens of thin sugar layers. This was delicate, expensive work, which explains why yours was likely made by an apprentice with anger issues. Nearby, a young girl licks something on a stick. It's sticky, glossy, suspiciously red. Apple? You ask. She shakes her head. Radish. You blink. Apparently, candied radishes were a thing. So were sugar-dipped onions, parsnip licorice, and something called sweet garlic crunch. Your stomach lurches. One stall boasts a plague cookie, a hard biscuit made with cloves, honey, and crushed rosemary, said to ward off illness. The merchant offers you one on the house. You accept. It breaks a little as you bite. It's earthy, medicinal, and not nearly as cursed as you expected. Still, you're learning fast. Color meant danger. In a world where most food was brown, beige, or grayish, bright foods were suspect. Green marzipan could be nettles, or copper salts. Blue pastries might involve lapis, dust or indigo used more for dyeing clothes than feeding humans. Fringe scholars once uncovered a cookbook that recommended using the scrapings of a blue window pane to color custards. Whether it was a joke or an actual recommendation remains hotly debated. You take a final sweet from the stall, a small round sugar drop wrapped in linen. You unwrap it, pop it in, and taste pure honey spiked with something sharp, almost citrusy. It's not bad. You savor it as the market begins to quiet down. Sweets weren't always safe. They weren't always sweet. But in the gritty world of medieval junk food, even one decent sugar drop felt like a tiny victory. Feeling cautiously optimistic after the sugar drop and only mildly traumatized by the marzipan frog, you wander toward a long wooden table stacked with something familiar. Bread. Glorious, neutral, dependable bread. Your modern instincts rejoice finally. A food group that feels safe. But the first thing you notice is the color. Not golden, not fluffy, not baguette chic. No, this bread is dark, blackened almost. Roughly hewn, dense as a cobblestone, and speckled with something. You're handed a small loaf. It's warm, heavier than expected. You knock it gently against the table out of curiosity. It thuds. Like a weapon. You take a bite. It's earthy, a little sour, gritty. There's definitely some bark in there. And maybe straw. Maybe. Welcome to peasant bread. Historians confirm that for most people in medieval Europe, white bread was a fantasy reserved for the wealthy. The average person ate what was called maslin, a dark, coarse blend of rye, barley, oats, and whatever other grains were lying around and hadn't been nibbled by mice. In years of bad harvests, things got creative. Ground up acorns, peas, chestnut flour, even chopped straw and powdered tree bark were added to bulk it up. You try to chew. A hard crunch interrupts your thoughtful nibbling. A pebble? Probably. Grit. In flour was common thanks to primitive milling methods. Most stones were hand ground on large slabs, and bits of the grinder often ended up in the dough. Over time, this wrecked people's teeth. Archaeological finds show extensive tooth wear even among children. Fringe historians once examined a medieval monk's remains and noted enamel wear consistent with biting gravel regularly. You think of your own molars. You chew a little more gently. The bread itself is dry, and it fights you all the way down. You notice some green flecks. You hope they're herbs. They're not. They're mold. And nobody seems concerned. You try another. Sample. This one is lighter in color. Oat bread, maybe. It's slightly sour and has a smoky taste. The vendor explains it was baked in a communal oven shared by the whole village, often fueled by burning animal dung. He says this casually, like it's a delightful fun fact. You nod. You die a little inside. There were, of course, better breads. Nobles enjoyed fine white, manchet loaves made from sieved flour and milk. Priests and monks often had access to decent wheat bread, sometimes even enriched with egg or spices. But on the street, on a vendor's stall, you got the leftovers of the leftovers. Whatever was cheap, sturdy, and didn't attract too many flies. A woman next to you holds out what she calls a sweet loaf. You're suspicious, rightly so. It's flavored with crushed carrots and a touch of honey, but the honey is scarce and the carrots are fibrous. It tastes like someone whispered dessert near a sack of oats. Still, people are buying and smiling. Because in the medieval world, bread wasn't just food, it was everything. A meal's foundation, a vessel for pottage, a tool, a plate, even a spoon when needed. It was sustenance. Even when it was half mold and quarter gravel, you spot a peculiar dish nearby. Bread trencher stew. Basically, thick slices of stale bread used as plates, soaking up whatever stew or sauce was dumped on them. When finished, the soaked bread could be eaten or tossed to beggars and dogs. One man is licking his trencher like it owes him money. Another is chewing his with a spoon. Slowly and seriously, you try one. It's soggy, cold. The bottom has disintegrated into mush. But there's something comforting in the ritual of it. The food isn't great, but it feels real. And in the silence between bites, with the sun lowering and the last of the bread being sold off to hungry children, you realize something strange. You're full. Your jaw aches. Your teeth are coated in flour dust. Your stomach is making confused gurgling noises. But you've tasted history, and it tastes like bark, gravel, and honesty. You wander away from the bread stalls, tongue dry and spirits dented. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the market square, and you follow the scent of something warm and greasy toward a row of sizzling cauldrons. The scent is familiar, fried, crispy, a little like bacon, but also like something that shouldn't be this hot. and this alive smelling at the same time. You peek into one of the iron pots and see golden lumps bobbing in a pool of what you hope is oil. It is not. It's beef drippings. This is where the deep-fried dreams of the medieval world come to life and promptly fall apart. A vendor hands you a skewer. Something round and doughy. Fritter, he says. Fresh. You bite in. It's chewy, a little sweet, a lot greasy. The crust is crisp, but the inside is gummy, undercooked in that special way that makes your jaw work harder than your conscience. You smile politely. Historians confirm that medieval frying oil was rarely oil in the way we know it. Olive oil was rare and expensive outside of southern Europe, so cooks used rendered animal fat, beef drippings, pig lard, goose fat, whatever they had from the previous day's roasting. That same fat was then reused over and over and over. You ask the vendor how old the fat is. He shrugs. From Sunday. You glance up. It's Thursday. Delightful. Still. Fried food was wildly popular, partly because it made everything taste like something. A few herbs, a bit of sugar or pepper, and a deep dunk in boiling fat, and even turnip peels could become a snack. In fact, turnip peels were intentionally fried and sold as cracklings. The next treat you try is a small, golden ball. It's hollow, almost pastry-like. You get excited. Then you bite down. It's filled with chopped onions and bits of dried eel. You chew slowly, regretfully. The eel has a fishy afterglow that lingers like an awkward goodbye. The woman running the stall grins. My mother's recipe. You nod with what you hope is respectful enthusiasm. A nearby man dips something into a vat of hot fat, what looks like an apple slice wrapped in dough. You ask. Apple fritter, he says. You reach for it eagerly. One bite in, your teeth hit something hard, a clove, and another. There's cinnamon. And is that vinegar? Yes, vinegar. A popular combination. Apparently, the apple's gone mushy from overcooking, and the dough is crisp around the edges, but raw in the middle. It's chaos. But it's hot and sweet and greasy, basically medieval carnival food. And you kind of get it now. Even monks were known to indulge. Some abbey kitchens specialized in Lenten fritters, made without eggs or dairy but fried in oil infused with herbs. One fringe record even claims a nun invented a fried custard ball by accident dropping a pot of curdled milk into goose. Fat. The result? Dessert. Sort of. You try one more item. Something rolled in flour and fried to a crisp. You bite in. It's cheese. Melted, bubbling cheese, folded into dough and browned in lard. You exhale through your nose. This is actually not terrible. Then the aftertaste hits sharp, sour, like the cheese had opinions about you personally. That's the problem with medieval frying. There was no filtration, no temperature control, no discard after 3 uses. Guideline. You fried what you had in what you could save, and you hoped it didn't burn the house down. But you also didn't waste anything. And there's something admirable in that. Or at least understandable. Still chewing, you watch children run past with hands full of fried barley cakes, their fingers slick with fat. A man bites into a fried beet slice like it's a prize. A young couple shares what might be a donut, filled with possibly turnip paste and joy. You sit down on a low stone wall, belly buzzing with a low, gurgling hum. You've just deep-fried your dignity. But hey, welcome to junk food in the 1300s. As you sit on the low stone wall, letting your fried eel fritter settle in with the rest of its medieval roommates, a sudden wave of cheer rises nearby. Laughter, bells, the distant whine of a bagpipe. You turn your head toward a cluster of colorful stalls nestled under fluttering banners. It's a feast day fair, basically, a medieval food court, complete with bad decisions and festive. Indigestion. You wander over. The first thing you see is a bubbling cauldron of what looks like melted cheese. A child dunks a chunk of stale bread into it with glee. You step closer. The vendor lifts a spoon. Hot cheese sauce, he explains proudly. Goat, cow, and something we found in the barn. You take a sample on a bit of bread. It's stringy, salty, and slightly fermented. But it's warm, and after the bark-flavored bread you chewed through earlier. Your standards are flexible. The man gestures toward a row of skewers, fried sausages, grilled kidneys, apple slices dipped in sour cream and mustard. You blink. Not one stick features what looks like a grilled egg inside a dough wrapper. He calls it feast pouch. You decide not to investigate further. Historians describe medieval feast foods as an exercise in overcompensation. On festival days, food was meant to impress. Even street vendors got theatrical. They dyed food bright colors, shaped dough into animals, and combined ingredients with abandon. This explains the next item you try, a fried dough ball stuffed with prunes and fish paste. It tastes aggressive. There's also a bowl of plum stew. Sounds nice, right? You scoop some into your mouth. It's plums, yes, but also onion, garlic, vinegar, and chunks of mutton. Sweet and savory in a way that challenges your ability to remain polite. You cough a little. The vendor grins. It opens the blood, he says. A nearby table sells tiny meat pies with crusts dyed red and blue. The coloring comes from crushed berries and copper salts. Fringe sources claim one noble died from consuming too many violet-colored pastries. You chew cautiously. Children crowd around a barrel where a man is dipping apples in something sticky and dark. You assume it's caramel. It is not. It's boiled honey and wine reduced to a syrup so thick it strings like tar. The apple is crunchy, at least. You make a note to brush your teeth if you had a toothbrush, which, in this century, you absolutely do not. You next try a roasted cheese ball on a stick. It squeaks as you bite. This is fire cheese, a popular street snack made by melting curd cheese over coals and rolling it in herbs and ash. Yes, literal ash. It's warm, smoky, and actually kind of good. You're interrupted by someone handing you a wafer. It's paper thin, sweet, and covered in tiny pink dots. Comfits. This one has fennel inside, less spicy than the ginger grenades from earlier. You chew it like a reward for surviving the stew. One of the most alarming stalls features what looks like churros. Your heart leaps. Hope blooms. Then you realize it's boiled cow tendon dipped in honey and rolled in flour. Fried to a crisp. You take a bite. It snaps. Loudly. A man next to you breaks one in half and says, "Best eaten with beer." You agree, if only to wash down the flavor of regret. And let's talk about digestion for a moment. Because the medieval feast scene, it came with consequences. Spices were believed to stimulate the humors. Food that made you burp was praised. Food that didn't was suspicious. Dried mint, vinegar tonics, and bitter greens were all popular cures for post-feast. Discomfort. You see an old woman hawking candied fennel seeds and pickled dandelion roots. You try one. It's tangy, then bitter, then strangely minty. Your stomach makes a sound like a question mark. Still, for all the chaos, people are joyful. It's a rare moment of celebration. Banners flap, minstrels play. Couples share fried eel tails with soft smiles. Children lick honey off their wrists. You, however, are fading. Feast food is dangerous. It looks better than it tastes, and it tastes like indigestion dressed for a party. But it feels festive, which might be enough. You wipe honey from your chin. You look toward the dusk pink sky. You made it through the medieval fair dot, barely dot, and your intestines may never forgive you. You ease away from the feast day frenzy, your tongue coated in conflicting flavors and your stomach quietly plotting a coup. Around the edge of the market, past the minstrels and the pickled radish juggler, yes, that's real, you find yourself in a quieter lane, a place where the food doesn't shout or sizzle, but bubbles gently in thick clay pots. A wooden sign hangs over a crooked stall. Pottage served all hours. You almost laugh. Pottage again. You step closer and peek into a pot. This version is beige. Not brown, not green, not orange, just beige. A medley of beans, oats, leeks, and what looks like a withered cabbage leaf floats near the surface. It smells faintly of wet burlap and boiled. Shoe dot, you sit on a rickety bench and accept a bowl. The woman serving it calls this widow's pottage. Her tone is gentle, rehearsed, like she's handed out this same scoop for decades. You take a bite dot, it tastes like humble, boiled persistence, and surprisingly, you kind of like it. See, pottage wasn't just food, it was the backbone of the medieval diet. It didn't aim to impress, it aimed to last. A single pot could feed a family for a week. Left on a low fire all day, ingredients were added as they became available. Carrots, barley, dried beans, the odd bone or two. Every bowl was a little different. Every version a quiet survival story. Historians still debate how nutritious pottage really was. Some claim it provided the perfect balance of carbs, fiber, and protein, if you were lucky enough to add lentils or marrow. Others say it was just hot water with an attitude. You look around. A group of laborers slurp from their bowls, wiping their mouths on sleeves. A child dunks a crust of stale bread and hums softly. An old man chews methodically, staring into the cheer. Pot like it owes him answers. This pottage, unlike the flamboyant feast food, is honest. No tricks. No eels pretending to be dessert. Just warm, thick spoonfuls of what your grandmother might call stick-to-your-ribs fare. There are other variations, too. The vendor shows you green pottage, made with peas, parsley, and mint. It's bright, grassy, and oddly refreshing if slightly gritty. There's also milk pottage, which sounds comforting until you realize it involves curdled goat's milk, oats, and vinegar. You pass on that one. A traveler nearby shares his own concoction, pottage with prunes and onions. It smells like a confused pie filling. He swears by it. For the bowels, he says solemnly. You nod, not entirely sure how to respond. At another stall, you're offered a poor man's stew, thinner than pottage, made mostly from onion, skins and flour, thickened with breadcrumbs and seasoned with nothing but salt and prayer. You accept a small cup. It tastes like wet toast. But again, it's warm. And that's something. Fringe records describe pottage festivals in rural villages, competitions for the best tasting stew using only what was found in a mile's radius. One champion recipe included snails, nettles, and a rabbit's foot. Not as a garnish, but for texture. The judge described it as surprisingly lively. You imagine he meant that metaphorically. You hope that the longer you sit in this quiet corner of the market, the more you start to understand the role this humble dish played. Pottage wasn't celebrated, it wasn't remembered, but it was there, every day, feeding the cold, the tired, the overworked. It was the default setting of medieval survival, and unlike the loud, flamboyant festival food or the risky, bright-colored sweets, this stuff was real. You knew what you were getting. Eventually, your bowl is empty. You hand it back, thank the woman, and stand. There's no fanfare, no spiced aftertaste. Just warmth in your belly and the quiet knowledge that, if you Had to live here, this would be the food that got you through it. You stretch your back and move on from the pottage stand, hands warmed by the memory of that last bowl. The market is winding down now. Shadows lengthen. The clang of iron ladles hitting empty pots has replaced the earlier shouting. But before, you can slip away into the quieter side streets. Something catches your eye. A tray ornate, glittering, and precariously perched atop a velvet-draped barrel. On it, tarts. Not just any tarts. These are bizarre little masterpieces, shaped like flowers, stars, even miniature castles. One is topped with something that looks like a roasted date cradled in a fried oyster shell. Another has almonds carved. To resemble teeth, you sigh. You approach. The vendor is a sharp-eyed woman with nimble fingers and a suspiciously confident smile. "Almond tart?" she asks, offering one that resembles a coiled snake. You accept. Carefully. The crust is crisp. The filling is thick, sweet, and just a little grainy. Almond paste. With hints of rosewater and something spiced, maybe cloves. It's actually good. And then you bite down on a candied pepper hidden in the middle. Your tongue recoils. She watches you, amused. Surprise. Keeps the mind awake. You nod like that's a completely normal thing to do with dessert.c, medieval dessert makers. We're not aiming for subtlety. They didn't have chocolate or cream-filled pastries or anything that might be called light. Instead, they leaned into the dramatic. They liked texture. They liked spice. And they loved to play tricks. Historians call it subtlety. But not because the flavors were refined, no. Quite the opposite. The word referred to elaborate, often theatrical food disguises. Tarts that looked like birds. Cakes that exploded. With confetti. Pastries that bled fruit compote when cut open. Sometimes the outside would be sweet and the inside full of fish. Just because you try a second tart. This one has a lattice top and smells promising. The vendor assures you it's fruit and nut. You take a bite and immediately crunch into what feels like gravel, not gravel. Pine nuts. Whole. Roasted. Your molars protest. Still, the overall flavor is not bad. Sweetness from dried figs, a faint smokiness from the wood-fired oven. Even some cinnamon, which suggests someone in this market has money or very good connections. The next tray contains tiny molded marzipan hearts, but the vendor warns you not to eat the red ones. Cinnamon oil, she says. It burns. You ask if anyone eats them anyway. Oh yes, she says, for love or revenge. Charming. You try a slice of marchpane tower, an almond cake stacked with layers of dried fruit, honey glaze, and something that crackles in your mouth like sand. Possibly sugar crystals, possibly just sand. You don't ask. There's also something called cream of tartar. You assume it's a sauce. It is not. It's tart dough spread thin, baked, hard, and topped with curd cheese and vinegar-soaked pears. It tastes like emotional confusion, but you admire the effort. Fringe recipes for medieval tarts include eel and apple custard, egg yolks and ginger syrup, and milk jelly and pastry boats. You silently vow to avoid anything shaped like a boat. A noble-looking man stops by the stall and purchases a tart shaped like a swan. It's coated in gold leaf. Yes, actual gold. Edible metals were a medieval flex, especially among the elite. Gold, silver, even ground pearls were sprinkled over dishes to brighten the humors. You ask if gold tastes like anything. The vendor shrugs. Wealth, she says. Of course. As the tray empties, she presses one last item into your palm. A tart the size of a coin. Fig and pepper, she says. It'll wake you up. You nod. Pop it into your mouth. Sweet, then hot, then strangely floral. Your eyebrows rise involuntarily. She grins. And you realize medieval desserts weren't about comfort. They were about spectacle, surprise, disruption, a moment of chaos at the end of a heavy meal. A reminder that sugar, when you could get, wasn't for dulling the senses. It was for shaking them awake. You walk away chewing, unsure if you've just had a treat or a test of character, possibly both. You continue your slow trudge through the market's quieter back lanes, tongue tingling from that pepper-laced tart. The crowd has thinned. Torches are being lit. Vendors are stacking trays, covering pots, or chasing chickens out of their stalls. You think, just for a moment, that you've seen it all. And then you pass a vendor selling fortune wafers. You stop. The man wears a hood and speaks in rhymes. His stand is simple, a tray of thin, round biscuits, each folded like a clamshell and tied with a thread. Pick your future, he says. One bite, one truth. You're not superstitious, but also, it's late, you're full of eel and vinegar, custard, and this feels oddly appropriate. You choose a wafer at random. You pull the thread. The wafer cracks softly, and a tiny scroll falls into your hand. You read, "Tomorrow's meal may be colder, but it won't bark." You blink. Poetry? You ask. He winks. Or leftover dog? Hard to say. You decide not to press further. You nibble the wafer. It's crisp, slightly sweet, and faintly herby, maybe anise. One of the better things you've eaten today, which surprises no one more than you. Fortune wafers were rare but real, usually served during feast days or at the end of noble meals. Some included hidden coins. Others carried messages, blessings, jokes, or ominous warnings. A few were just hard enough to chip a tooth, the surprise being dental. Historians still argue whether these were novelty treats or early edible tokens of social commentary. A fringe theory posits that monks used them as a teaching tool, wrapping bits of scripture in bread to encourage memorization. You hope yours wasn't religious. You definitely chewed it too quickly. Next to the fortune wafers is another curiosity. Coin cakes. Flat biscuits with metal tokens baked into them, sort of like medieval Cracker Jack prizes, minus the caramel. The coins could be real, or wooden, or stone. The surprise was part of the fun. So was the risk of swallowing them. You try one. It's dense, slightly burnt. A little like if gingerbread had ambitions, but no resources. Inside, you find a tiny carved figure, a crude animal, maybe a lion. The vendor tells you it means you'll face a great journey. You smile. Too late. To your left, another stand offers something called hazard bites. You raise an eyebrow. Game of chance, the vendor says. One's sweet, one's salt, one's pepper, one's terrible. You hesitate. You pick. You chew. It's sweet. You breathe a sigh of relief. The man chuckles. Lucky. Some get the fish one. You move on quickly. There's a strange joy in these food pranks. They're theatrical, a bit reckless, and oddly personal. Medieval meals weren't just about sustenance. They were about surprise, performance, even psychology. At a nearby table, a group of boys play a game with false nuts, sugar-coated pebbles that looked edible but weren't. They laugh as one bites down and howls. You wince in sympathy, but also kind of admire the commitment. Fringe records speak of cuckoo pastries, filled with feathers or garlic instead of fruit, served at weddings for laughs. Some nobles had entire pies designed to spill live frogs or birds onto unsuspecting guests. Dessert was not a peaceful time. You try a final treat, a blessing bun, shaped like a cross, filled with honeyed beans and stamped with a saint's symbol. It's warm, soft, sweet even. A rare comfort. You close your eyes, savoring it. Then your molars crunch something unexpectedly firm. You spit it out. A dried cherry pit. Possibly symbolic. Definitely unwelcome. You smile, shaking your head. Because of course, even blessings in medieval cuisine come with a hazard. You brush off your tunic. The last crumbs of mystery bun falling to the cobblestones. Around. You, vendors, pack up. The air cools. The torches flicker. Your mouth still burns a little. Your stomach hums in strange chords, but your pocket now holds a carved lion, your lips the ghost of rose and vinegar, and your memory the distinct sense that dessert here isn't an ending. It's just another strange chapter in the never-ending banquet of medieval unpredictability. You step into a narrower lane now, feet aching, hands sticky with residual sugar and honesty. A low clanging echoes ahead, metal on metal, and as you round the corner, you see a line of vendors setting up for tomorrow's fish day. Friday. You single quotes that survived almost everything. But now comes the real test. Meatless medieval food. A boy darts past you carrying a basket of writhing eels. You freeze. The vendor at the next stall grins. "Fish for the faithful," he says, pointing to a row of shallow pans. In them, dried herring, smoked perch, salted cod, and yes, coiled eels glistening like damp ropes. You edge closer to a pot steaming with what smells like pickled socks. The sign reads, "Eel in almond sauce." You sit down, cautiously accepting a bowl. The eel is tender, somehow oily and chewy at the same time. The sauce is pale, nutty, and a bit sour. Not awful, but your brain can't ignore the squiggly texture. You chew. You chew a little longer. Then you pause and reassess your life choices. Historians are clear. Eels were everywhere. Cheap, plentiful, and considered acceptable on fasting days, eel was practically medieval tofu. They were traded like currency, raised in household ponds, and appeared on everything from royal platters to peasant pottages. A fringe theory even suggests that some monks preferred eels because of their meaty resilience. Whatever that means, you try a fried eel fritter next. It's crispy on the outside, but the inside, oh no, it squirts. You don't ask what. Moving down the stall row, you find pickled herring on black bread. It's salty, pungent, and tastes like someone seasoned it by mistake. There's also dried haddock smoked over peat. You take a cautious bite. The flavor is earthy, fishy, and slightly mossy. The vendor beams. That's the peat. Ah, yes. Of course. Then there's the jelly. A bowl of trembling, pale gray jelly studded with flakes of fish and herbs. You poke it. It wobbles. A woman offers you a spoon. It's lamprey aspic, she says. You smile with the kind of tight politeness that suggests you're reconsidering your entire identity. Aspic, gelatin made from boiled fish bones and skin, was a staple for fish days. Sometimes it was molded into fish shapes, which feels deeply unnecessary. Sometimes it was dyed green with parsley. Sometimes it just existed. You try a bite. It melts slowly, tragically, leaving behind a film of regret. Next, a man hands you something that looks like bacon. It's not. It's smoked beaver tail. You stare. It's allowed on Fridays, he says proudly, because it lives in water. Medieval fasting rules were imaginative. Anything that spent time in water. Beaver, barnacle, geese, porpoise was fair game on meatless days. Some even argued that whale qualified as fish. And yes, there were whale steaks. You silently pray you never encounter one. You chew. The beaver tail is fatty, a little crispy, a little chewy, a little confusing. Not bad, still deeply confusing. You rinse your mouth with a sip of thin ale. And then you're handed a pie. You hesitate. But this one is made of pike and almond custard, topped with rosewater and raisins. You chew slowly, eyes widening. It's edible, pleasant even. Then you hit the cinnamon clove core and the fish. Reasserts itself. You set the pie down gently, like a wounded bird dot to your left. Someone is selling snail stew. You politely decline. Another vendor offers you fish butter, which is exactly what it sounds like. Whipped fish fat mixed with herbs and spread on bread. You decline more firmly, and yet people line up. They laugh. They lick their fingers because Friday didn't mean going hungry. It meant getting creative. It meant leaning to what the river gave you, or the pond, or the eel trap out back got as the lamps flicker and more eels slither across chopping boards. You realize something. You've now eaten enough fish to qualify. As part aquatic, your body may never forgive you, but at least on fish day, no one serves pies with teeth. After the eel odyssey, you shuffle down a quieter street where the torchlight softens and the crowd thins to mostly cloaked figures and servants in a rush. But this part of town smells. Different, richer, more polished, the bread has whiter crusts. The meat is glazed. The pies are symmetrical. You've wandered into the realm of the nobility's takeout, or as close as you can get in the 1300s. A vendor wearing a doublet embroidered with gold thread beckons you over. Laid out for the manor folk, he says proudly, lifting a polished tray filled with tiny rolled meats, blue jelly molds, and something that looks suspiciously like a cooked swan wing. You raise an eyebrow. He nods. Noble snack food. Better fat, better fire, same basic confusion. You pick up a tiny roll of meat dyed a soft pink and tied with a sprig of thyme. Swan jerky, he says. You chew. It's salty, soft, surprisingly fragrant. You dare to be impressed until the aftertaste hits. Cloves, ashes, and something metallic. The vendor sees your expression and chuckles. Marinated in red wine, aged in oak, and sometimes lead. Ah, yes. The noble touch. Historians confirm that noble. Fast food wasn't always safer, just more elaborate. They had access to exotic spices, imported fruits, and the best cooks. But they also had a fondness for color, novelty, and highly questionable culinary flexes. Like meat jellies dyed bright blue, you point to a wobbling cube of blue on the tray. Calf's foot jelly with lavender, he says. The color is crushed blueberries and a touch of lapis dust. You take a small bite. It tastes like perfume, cartilage, and money. You move on. Another vendor offers sugar glass, clear candy shaped like goblets, swords, and castles. You nibble on a candy window pane. It shatters like sponge sugar and tastes like very expensive dental work. Then there's the gilded meatballs. You're handed one wrapped in thin pastry and brushed with edible gold. It's made of pigeon, almond, and dates. Rich, sweet, chewy. You're halfway through when you crunch something hard. You blink. Pearl, the vendor says casually. Accidental? You ask. He shrugs. Depends on the household. Some noble kitchens like to hide pearls in food as a game of surprise wealth. One record from Burgundy tells of a pie with silver coins baked inside for festive breaking of teeth. Charming. Fringe scholars debate how often real gold and gems were consumed. Some argue it was symbolic. Others say it really happened until the digestion problems began. You think of your molars. You move on. At another table, you see banquet. Bread, soft, white, and shaped like animals. Peacocks, foxes, dragons. You select a fox. It's filled with saffron rice and minced nuts. Subtle, but the bread is so white it glows. How? You ask. The baker leans in. It's blanched with lime and sifted 9 times. real flour, not peasant chaff. You nod politely, trying not to compare it to the bark loaf from earlier. There's also a bowl of candied rose petals. You take one. It's sweet, fragrant, sticky, lovely until you realize it's stuck to your teeth with the clinginess of medieval. You notice a tall jar labeled dried figs and wine. You try one. It bursts with sweetness, but there's a sourness that suggests the wine was less fermented and more forgetful. Still, your tongue doesn't protest. And then, oh no, it's another jelly mold. This one is pink, suspiciously gelatinous, shaped like a fish. Inside. Shredded goose. You take the tiniest nibble. It slides across your palate like an expensive mistake. The goose is rich and gamey. The jelly is tangy and cold. Together, they taste like power and punishment. Noble food, you realize, wasn't better. It was just more dramatic. More sculpted, more gilded. And somehow even less predictable. You step away from the glowing trays of swan and sapphire, your body unsure whether it's full or simply in shock. But you do feel one thing very clearly. This medieval fast food tour has now taken you from the muddy trench of bark bread to the shimmering gelatin of royal delusion. And somewhere in between was a fried eel with almond sauce that still haunts your throat. You drift away from the noble alley, your breath fogging slightly now as the evening cools. The market is settling into that tired hum of a place that's fed too many people too quickly. But just as your stomach considers waving a tiny white flag, you're hit by a new sensation, a sudden blast of heat and spice that wafts from a distant corner. You follow it, and there it is, the spice stall, tucked between a candle, merchant and a man selling miracle cures for hot spleen, this little corner bursts with color and aroma. Cinnamon sticks in bundles, mounds of golden saffron, cloth bags of mustard seed, and wooden bowls filled with black pepper, cumin, clove, and nutmeg. A vendor is grinding something with the fury of a tiny storm. He grins when he sees you. Your eyes are red. That's good. Means it's working. You nod, because what else can you do? He hands you a slice of bread with something thick and red spread across it. Pepper jam, he explains. A luxury. You bite. Your eyes water immediately. The sweetness of honey hits first, but it's quickly overtaken by black pepper, a splash of vinegar, and a note of what can only be described as fireplace ashes. You cough. The vendor beams. See, spices in the medieval world were more than flavor. They were medicine. They were magic. They were wealth on a plate. Historians confirm that a pound of pepper could buy you a goat. A handful of saffron, worth more than a servant's weekly wage. Nutmeg was so valuable, it was kept locked away in noble kitchens like a family heirloom. And yet you find it in street food. Why? Because even the poorest dishes, especially the oldest and smelliest, needed cover. A generous dash of clove or cumin could turn yesterday's meat into something tolerable. It didn't fix spoilage, but it distracted you from it. Kind of like spraying perfume on a used sock. You try a sample of spiced stew. It's mostly lentils, but the flavor? Intense. Heavy cinnamon, burnt onion, and what you swear is ginger. The heat lingers. Your nose runs. But somehow it's better than plain. A nearby vendor sprinkles powdered mustard over a slice of eel. For digestion, he says. You watch someone else coat hard cheese and cumin and eat it with pear paste. For warmth, they whisper. Fringe apothecary manuals claim that cloves stimulated thought, cinnamon promoted cheerfulness, and saffron could treat melancholy. Modern scholars remain unconvinced, but medieval folk were devout believers in food as medicine. You chew a candied fennel seed. It numbs your tongue slightly. You try clove cake, which is just flatbread rubbed with clove oil and a sprinkle of salt. It's pungent, dry, and tastes like a chewable cough drop, but oddly, not terrible. Then someone offers you fire figs, dried fruit soaked in honey, stuffed with pepper, and baked in ash. The flavor is rich, bizarre, and almost thrilling. Your palate is no longer sure if it's at war or having a religious experience. A monk passes by, chewing something in contemplation. He offers you a bite. It's spiced wine bread, made with dried herbs, nutmeg, and cardamom. You chew thoughtfully. It tastes like warm holiday guilt. You learn quickly that spice wasn't just about taste, it was about status. To season your food boldly said something about you. Even if your stew was thin and your bread was black, the presence of spice meant you were fighting back, fighting spoilage, fighting blandness, not fighting the cold, and perhaps, most importantly, fighting boredom. You thank the spice vendor, lips tingling, and wander off with a tiny packet of peppercorns tucked into your pouch like a souvenir. Tonight, you've eaten foods fried in mystery oil, boiled in pottage logic, and crusted in historical confusion. But the spiced street snacks, they remind you that medieval people like modern ones wanted boldness, even if it made them sneeze. And as you disappear down the quiet lane, the warmth of clove and pepper still humming on your tongue, you realize something. In a world without refrigeration, spice was the closest thing to hope. The spices still buzz gently on your tongue as you meander deeper into the twilight lanes of the market, following a cooler breeze and the faint smell of milk. You round a corner and find a woman ladling something pale and frothy into clay mugs. A wooden sign above her reads, "Almond milk and butter substitutes for Lent, the poor, and the particular." You pause. She sees your expression and nods. "No cows here," she says. "Just almonds, oats, and imagination." You accept a mug of the almond milk. It's warm, slightly grainy, sweetened with a bit of honey. Not unpleasant. Sort of like drinking cereal rinse water, but comforting in a strange way. This, she tells you, is the future of dairy. In a world without fridges and with an overabundance of religious fasting days, real milk and butter weren't always practical or permitted. So people improvised. Almond milk was the dairy alternative of the Middle Ages, and it wasn't a niche option. It was everywhere. Nobles drank it during Lent. Monks used it in pottages. Bakers used it in fake custards when animal products were off limits. Historians note that almond milk was labor-intensive, requiring ground almonds, water, a mortar, a pestle, and patience. But it stored better than real milk, didn't curdle in the heat, and could be flavored with spices, sugar, or even salt for savory use. You take another sip. Not bad. The woman hands you a wedge of something wrapped in cloth. "Lent cheese," she says. You blink. It's not cheese. It's oat flour, almond paste, and vinegar pressed into a mold and aged just enough to convince your nose of its cheesiness. You bite. It's tangy, crumbly, and mildly nutty, surprisingly good. You'd call it cheese adjacent. Nearby, a man is churning something that looks like butter. It is not butter. It's mock butter, made from mashed peas and oil whipped with ground mustard seed. You spread it on bread. It melts weirdly, but it adds richness, and that's the point. The need for alternatives wasn't always about choice. It was about rules. Religious fast days occurred over 100 times a year, and on those days, meat, milk, and eggs were forbidden. So cooks got creative. You try a spoonful of Lent cream, a dessert made from almond milk, thickened with rice flour and flavored with rose water. It's soft, mildly sweet, and suspiciously pudding-like. A little chalky, but respectable. Then you're handed a small tart. Inside, What looks like egg custard. It is not. It's mashed chickpeas mixed with almond milk and saffron. Tastes like eggs. The vendor insists. You take a bite. He's not wrong. Fringe text suggests some households used eggless yolks made from carrot puree dyed with turmeric, especially during Holy Week. Others used mixtures of breadcrumbs and almond paste to create milkless cheese for banquets. You try another delicacy, a mock cheesecake. It's made from curdled almond milk, sweetened with date syrup, and baked in a thin rye crust. The texture is grainy. The flavor is oddly elegant. You're surprised by how thoughtful it tastes. You ask the vendor if people liked these substitutions. She shrugs. Didn't matter. They had to. There's a lesson there, somewhere under the crust. She also offers fishless fish pie, a bear blend of mushrooms, herbs, and breadcrumbs shaped like fillets and painted with beetroot for color. You chew. It's savory, chewy, and oddly convincing if you squint your brain. More than anything, these foods are clever. They show you that medieval people weren't passive victims of hardship. They worked with what they had, sculpting flavor. Out of limits. They couldn't use milk? Fine. Almonds? No eggs? Fine. Mash something yellow. You finish the last sip of almond milk, warming your hands on the mug. In this quiet corner of the market, there are no blazing grills or glistening pies. Just substitutes, gentle, thoughtful, and a little bit strange. And somehow, it's this corner that feels the most human. Because here, food is a compromise, a workaround, a kind of soft resilience in pastry form. You finish your almond milk and hand the mug back with a quiet nod. Your hands are warm, your stomach confused but cooperative. You tell yourself you're finished eating for the night, that nothing more can surprise you. Then you smell it: smoke, meat, sewage. You follow your nose and find a lane that shouldn't exist, tucked behind a row of crumbling buildings and lit only by 2 flickering torches and a glowing fire pit. Around it, vendors lean against carts, their aprons stiff with old grease. You've reached the last frontier of medieval cuisine. Street food sold by plague-side latrines. The food here is cheaper, hotter, and infinitely riskier. Man gestures toward a cauldron bubbling over an open flame. The pot is blackened, the liquid inside an angry brown. Meat soup, he says. Real hot. Kills what kills. You peer in. Bits of something float to the top: bones, herbs, maybe beans. You squint. Is that fur? He ladles you a small cup. You sip. It's scalding, oily, and surprisingly flavorful, though you get the feeling most of the flavor comes from courage. Or soot. Possibly both. Historians are quick to remind us that most food sold this close to the edge of town came with risk. Vendors set up where foot traffic was high, even if it was next to open drains or plague pits. Hygiene? The idea existed. The practice? Less so. You move to a woman selling fried cakes. They smell sweet, but her hands are black with soot, and she's cooking them over a fire fueled by what looks like dried dung. You take one anyway. It's crisp, slightly sour, and carries a strong aftertaste of barn. She smiles. Cooked fast, no flies. You glance at the stack. She's not wrong. Nothing's landed on them. Nothing dares. Next to her, a boy offers rat skewers. You hesitate. He clarifies. Not real rat, just shaped like one. You breathe again. He hands you a stick of something brown and grilled, curled like a tail. It's mashed lentils and barley mixed with oil and pepper, shaped into a rodent and roasted until crispy. You bite. It's smoky, a little burnt, but if you ignore the shape honestly, not bad. A fringe tactic for marketing. make food memorable, if not appetizing. You turn to another pot, hot cider, or something like it. It's thick, reddish, and smells faintly of vinegar. The man ladling it calls it apple night wine. A blend of overripe apples, wine dregs, and whatever spices were cheap that week. You take a sip. It's strong, sweet, tart, and you're 70%. Sure, it's alcoholic. It also burns slightly going down, which might be a feature. Across the lane, a woman is selling death-defying fritters. She lifts one with her tongs. Boiled cabbage, bone marrow, oats, and mint. You try one. It's soft on the inside, crisp on the outside, and tastes like a dare baked in lard. Your stomach grumbles, either in appreciation or rebellion. You pass a final stall where someone is roasting something that looks like a bird. It's a fake bird, you're assured. Mushrooms, minced onions, and bread stuffing wrapped in cabbage leaves and tied with twine to mimic wings. You raise your brow. They look nicer than they taste. He admits. You nod and decline. Everywhere you look, someone is scraping the bottom of a cauldron, pouring the last of something into crusty mugs, brushing off yesterday's crumbs. And yet, they're laughing, eating, telling stories. A girl sits cross-legged on a sack, licking honey from a stick. A man drinks what's probably broth and definitely not tea. And in this strange, soot-streaked alley, life hums on. Not despite the food, but through it. You step back into the main square, the firelight fading behind you, the last flavors of mystery stew still clinging to your teeth. You realize now medieval street food wasn't just about hunger. It was resilience. Roasted and salted. It was survival. Skewered and fried. And sometimes it was even a rat-shaped lentil loaf pretending to be dinner. You re-enter the market square just as the last light begins to fade, replaced by the soft glow of lanterns hung from crooked beams and carts draped in canvas. You think perhaps you've reached the quiet part of the evening, the lull before. Everyone wanders home to digest and repent, but then you hear it, a low, rhythmic chant. Bless the feast, brace the belly. You follow the sound to a cluster of townsfolk gathered near a raised platform. A monk stands in front of a cart, arms open wide, chanting a benediction over a steaming bowl. The crowd repeats the phrase like a spell. You've stumbled into one of the most charmingly horrifying corners of medieval cuisine, the ritual of digestive food. The monk hands out small bundles of dried herbs wrapped in cloth mint, fennel, marjoram. You're told to chew gently and swallow slowly. It's for balance, for bloating, for belly wind, a phrase that makes your stomach flinch just hearing it. You accept a pinch of dried mint and chew. It's bitter, sharp, but soothing after. Hours of onion pies and eel jelly. Your gut murmurs, possibly in gratitude. Across the square, a young girl passes around small clay bottles labeled Ale of Calming. It's thin beer spiced with chamomile and sage, said to ease discomfort and promote sleep. You sip. It tastes like overbrewed tea with a beer aftertaste. Still strangely relaxing. Historians tell us that digestion was a serious concern in medieval times, with no concept of probiotics, refrigeration, or safe food handling. People turned to herbs and rituals. Meals often ended with little bites of fennel cake, sugared coriander, or dried plums. Speaking of which, a man nearby offers you a sweet plum log. It's a prune, really, but with a dash of anise and rolled in powdered ginger. You chew. Slowly. It's dense. But your stomach seems to appreciate the effort. Then there's the vinegar tonic. A boy offers you a thimble-sized cup. Keeps the sickness down, he promises. You sip. It's sharp, sour, and cuts through everything else in your mouth like a righteous blade. Some drink warm ale with cumin. Others chew bitter orange peel. You even see a woman with what looks like burnt toast rubbed with mint. She eats it solemnly, as if casting a ward against future meals. One man swears by pickled garlic soaked in wine. Another crunches sugared horseradish and mutters about keeping the humor in balance. A small group passes around a roasted fennel bulb dipped in honey and calls it windbreaker root. You don't ask. Fringe medical texts of the time recommended everything from boiled slugs for constipation to ground oyster shell for acidic temperament. You are not that desperate. You sit down beside a chimney stack where smoke drifts slowly into the cooling night. A woman hands you a final treat, a biscuit made of caraway and honey. It settles the heart, she says. You bite. It's dry mildly, sweet, and tastes like the end of a very long day. Around you, people begin to wind down. Vendors yawn. Children fall asleep on sacks of flour. A man hums quietly as he packs up his spice crates. And though your stomach is full of wildly incompatible ingredients, your spirit feels oddly balanced. This part of the meal, the after, was as important as the feast itself. Not just physically, but socially. To care for digestion was to care for community. People helped each other feel better, sleep easier, recover from the celebratory trauma that was medieval dining. You lean back, watch the sky darken, and let the gingered plum and cumin ale do their work. And for the first time since the bird-shaped, pastry-bled goose fat down your tunic, you feel calm. Maybe you won't die from dinner after all. You rise from your seat slowly, limbs reluctant to cooperate with your food-laden body. Around you, the square has taken on a hushed glow, dotted with pools of lantern light and the occasional flash of a fire pit licking the night air. The stalls are mostly closed now, their shutters drawn or tables cleared. But one corner remains very much alive. You walk toward it. A circle of people stands around a tall, apron-clad man who is flipping something over a stone griddle with theatrical flair. Sparks fly. People cheer. The smell hits you in a wave, earthy, sharp, and strangely nutty. You found the night snackers. This is where the food gets weird. A teenager hands you a thin, blistered disc. It's flat, warm, and dusted with what looks like charcoal. Bread. Bark, he says, to soak up the sin. You blink. You bite. It's smoky, crunchy, and oddly soothing. A bit of ash clings to your teeth, but you're too tired to care. Another vendor hands you something in a bowl. Late stew, he says, made with what the day forgot. You peer inside. You spot lentils, old carrot, probably a leek, a piece of boiled plum, and is that sausage? Nope, it's fried turnip. Shaped like sausage. You eat it anyway. Late-night medieval snacks were born out of fatigue and leftovers. They weren't about impressing guests or showing off spices. They were about staving off hunger until the sun rose again. That meant flatbreads, soft porridge, thick broth, and any fried vegetable brave enough to still resemble food. You chew through a midnight mash, a mix of oats, beans, and onion gravy served in a cup made of hard cheese. You don't ask how old the cheese is. You just eat it. And surprisingly, it works. You're then offered a street pudding. It's not dessert. It's peas, mashed apple, breadcrumbs, and suet baked into a lump the size of your fist. It's dense, damp, and seems like something that would bounce. If dropped, you nibble. It's sweet, savory, and strangely wholesome, like medieval meatloaf without the meat or the loaf. Nearby, someone selling night tallow. You ask what it is. Lamb fat mixed with oats and raisins, the vendor says. Keeps the dream strong. You try it. You immediately regret it. But then, 2 bites later, something settles. Maybe it's your stomach waving a little white flag and saying, "Fine, sure, this is who we are now." You're handed a shot of candle milk, a warm, thick drink made from almond milk, nutmeg, a dab of honey, and a floating crust of bread. It tastes like sleepy medieval cocoa dot, and suddenly, you feel very tired. People around you are eating slower now, talking less. The mood has changed. This is no longer the party of pies or the chaos of fried eel. This is the close of the meal, the end of the edible road. A time to sit, chew quietly, and wonder whether your stomach will ever forgive you. A man hands you a fig rolled in crushed fennel and wrapped in lettuce. "A sleep fig," he whispers. You chew. It's strange, sweet, herbal, watery. But something in it speaks of quiet, of stopping. Historians rarely write about these end-of-day snacks because they weren't impressive. They were humble, whispered foods. Comfort for the working stomach. A final pause before dreams. You lie back against a warm stone wall and stare at the darkened sky. You've eaten like a king, a peasant, a monk, and a rat all in one day dot, and now, with fig on your breath and turnip in your teeth, you feel like you belong here. You close your eyes for just a moment, not from fullness, but from peace. You open your eyes slowly to the hush of the nearly empty square. The lanterns have burned low, their flames no longer dancing, just trembling. The fires have died down to soft embers. The carts have vanished. Only a few scattered vendors remain. Scrubbing pots, packing cloth, humming to themselves like lullabies meant only for soup. And you're still here, still digesting a day's worth of ancient experiments in what might generously be called cuisine. A soft sound draws you toward a bench where a man sits with a sack beside him and a tin cup in his hand. He offers you a nod and gestures to the sack. "Roasted barley," he says. "Helps settle the noise in your belly." You take a handful. It's dry, chewy, nutty, like cereal's rustic, unwashed cousin. But the texture is grounding basic in the best way. And suddenly, you realize how quiet your stomach has gone. No protests, no alarms, just acceptance. The man drinks from his cup. "Barley water," he explains. "Good for the fire inside." You sip. It's lukewarm, thin, but soothing. Like oat milk left too long on the windowsill and forgiven anyway. This, you understand now, is the final phase of medieval eating. The quiet food. Not the pies with live birds. Not the spices with ambition. Just soft, calm, modest bites that know their place, and it's right here at the end. You're offered a wedge of something white and firm. It's called night cheese. It smells faintly of smoke and lemon balm. You nibble. It's gentle, a little salty, a little sour. A cheese with boundaries. You like it. Nearby, someone peels an apple. Not a candied one, not fried. Just a raw, mealy, ordinary apple. The juice runs down her hand as she eats in silence. And it feels sacred. Even the leftovers here have softened. A boy with a small bowl stirs what looks like a gray mash. Lentils, oat milk, crushed garlic, and mint. For those who can't sleep, he says quietly. You take a spoonful. It tastes like tired thoughts. And it's lovely. Historians rarely dwell on this phase of the meal, but monks wrote of it. Night foods, they said, should be slow, soft, and silent. No crunch, no color. Nothing to awaken the bile or disturb the spirit. You're handed one final thing, a small warm cake. It's made of barley, dried apple, and crushed herbs, barely sweet, fragrant with thyme. You bite. It doesn't sing. It doesn't shout. It settles. The man on the bench nods. End well, rest well. You sit next to him, chewing slowly. Somewhere a dog barks once. A baby whimpers, then goes still. The stars above are dim, but present like everything else in this hour. You rest your back against the stone, and as your eyes start to drift, your mouth still tasting barley, you finally understand. The worst medieval food wasn't the pies or the fish jellies. It was the expectation that food was supposed to comfort. Because here, it doesn't. It just carries you through, one bite at a time. Even when it's weird. Even when it's eel-shaped. Even when it's quiet. Especially then. You're not sure how long you sat there beside the bench, letting barley and silence carry the weight of everything you've eaten. But eventually, the faint echo of clanging pots and snuff torches fades entirely. The market is asleep. You rise. Not because you want more food, but because, of course, there's still more to see. At the very edge of the square, beyond the rows of shuttered stalls, you spot a flicker of motion. A tiny pop-up cart racks for curtains, a crooked lantern, and a table with just one thing on it, a single bowl. Curious, you approach. An old woman stands behind the table, stirring slowly. She looks up and smiles. "You've come far," she says. You nod, unsure whether she means distance or digestion. She ladles something into a rough ceramic bowl. "Worn bones broth," she says, "made with the ends of everything." You lift the bowl. It's clear, pale gold. Wisps of steam rise from it in slow, spiraling tendrils. You take a sip. And suddenly everything goes quiet inside you. It's warm in a way no stew was, light in a way no pie dared to be. The flavor? Subtle, salty, faintly herbal, a whisper of onion, a breath of marrow, a memory of carrot. Nothing in it, she says, but what was left. It's beautiful. This is where all the scraps of the day have come to rest. The last vegetable ends. The bare bones of meat, the water from the bottom of the pot, filtered, boiled, clarified. This is food as elegy. Historians sometimes refer to it as bone tea or hearth broth. Not a dish for show or hunger, just a slow offering to the body. A food that asks nothing of the stomach, only that it stay. You sip again. The woman hands you a crust of bread so thin and dry it's almost translucent. It melts into the broth, like paper. She doesn't charge you. You realize no one ever does. At this hour, this is food for when everything else has been eaten, when the pies are gone, when the feasts have faded, when even the spice stalls have packed up, and the laughter has vanished behind shuttered windows. You sip slowly. You breathe deeply. In this moment, nothing aches. The broth leaves a warmth in your chest that doesn't clamor or churn. It hums. Around you, shadows flicker. The smell of lard and jelly and burnt onion still clings faintly to your tunic, but under it, now, there's broth. Soft, plain, and forgiving. You place the bowl back on the table and nod in thanks. She smiles again, not saying anything more. And as you walk away, your steps lighter now. You understand this is how the medieval world ended its meal. Not with sugar. Not with fire, but with a bowl of broth made from everything forgotten. A bowl that says, you made it. You're still here. Now rest. You drift farther now, your limbs lighter, your mind quiet, lulled by that last sip of worn bones broth. The square has emptied almost entirely. Somewhere in the dark, a single lute plucks a lazy tune. It's the hour of ash sweeping and yawn stretching. You think the journey might be finished, but of course, the medieval world has one more trick tucked up its flour-dusted sleeve. Flickering candle glows from within a narrow wooden cart perched on bricks. Its sign, scribbled hastily in soot, stale snacks and forgotten bikes. Of course, you step closer. A young woman leans over a tray of dried-out treats. Bread crusts gone hard as stone, pie corners left uneaten, burnt pastry edges, and what might be the tip of a baked apple that surrendered too early. It's the edible lost and found of the day. She sees you and grins. Endings deserve endings too. She offers a biscuit toe, the final, overbaked edge of a ginger biscuit. It's rock hard, spicy, and takes you a full 30 seconds to break down into something vaguely swallowable. You love it a little. Beside that sits a bowl of spoon scrap, which is exactly what it sounds like. Bits of custard stuck to the side of a pot, scraped free and served cold. It's oddly delicious. Sweet, eggy, and slightly smoky from its proximity to an open flame earlier in the day. Then comes a cluster of crumbs and butter. She hands you a spoon. It's brown breadcrumbs fried in leftover drippings and spiced. With nutmeg dot, it tastes like the memory of breakfast. Historians rarely write about these scraps, not because they weren't valued, but because they weren't intended. They were the byproduct of intention, but in a world where nothing was wasted. They became a ritual, a way to honor the meal by finishing even its quietest remnants. You sample a slice of furnace toast. Burnt on one side, soft on the other, it was likely made from a piece of dough forgotten at the bottom of a bread oven. It crunches loudly in your ears, then softens, then lingers. A child nearby licks sugar paper, a piece of parchment. Scraped clean of boiled sugar candy, now just a ghost of sweetness and stickiness. He smiles with all his teeth, some still baby, some already medieval. You try a pinch of pan edge, the hardened layer from the side of a barley pudding pan. It's chewy, deeply browned. Tastes like every flavor from earlier compressed into a single bite. The day in edible form. There's even a drink, pot-bottom beer. The last pour from the bottom of the cask, cloudy and warm. You sip. It's tangy, sleepy, and faintly herbal. You imagine someone else poured it 5 hours ago and never came back. The woman wipes her hands on her apron and gestures to a round tin filled with odd bits. Endlings. She says, what the tongue forgets but the soul remembers. You smile. You reach in. A crust of fig, a smear of honey on bark, slice of carrot browned in its own sugars. All of it strange, all of it familiar, all of it. Enough. The medieval world, you realize, didn't let things go to waste, not just because it couldn't afford to, but because it saw value in the aftertaste, in the final moments. In the ending bite, you finish your last crumb, your last sip. No fanfare, no fireworks. Just the quiet hum of a full, weary world finally letting go. You wipe the last stray crumb from your lap and ease away from the endlings cart with a gentle bow of thanks. The candlelight behind you flickers and fades, swallowed by the encroaching dark. Your footsteps are slower now, not from exhaustion, but from the kind of full-bodied calm that only comes after sharing too much food with too many strangers. You've walked through pies, shaped like lies. Through fish pretending to be pudding, through desserts that fought back, but now you're heading toward silence. Still, one final scent beckons. A curl of smoke trails from a doorway tucked between two half-timbered homes. The door is open just a crack, and from within drifts a soft, sweet smell wood, honey, and flour. You knock once. No one answers. So, naturally, you step inside. It's not a tavern. It's not a bakery. It's someone's kitchen. Old stone walls, soot-streaked. A low table stacked with wooden bowls. A hearth glowing with the last of its fire. On the hearth, A wide clay pan with a spoon resting inside. In the pan, something pale and bubbling, speckled with herbs and glistening with what looks like melted fat. A man sits on a stool in the corner, humming as he tears bread into small hunks. He looks up, nods at you, then gestures to the hearth. Want a lick? He asks. You don't hesitate. This is kitchen scrap, the final taste. What the cook eats. What never makes it to table or stall. A thick gruel of barley, broth, and animal drippings stirred with herbs and maybe the ghosts of vegetables. You kneel and dip your spoon. It's earthy, deep, like a poem. Written in broth. You chew slowly. It tastes like someone worked all day to make something beautiful and didn't care if anyone noticed. The man chuckles. Not much, but it'll hold. You through till dreaming. You smile. It's exactly what it needs to be. There's a second pan on the edge of the hearth, a shallow bowl with something hardening inside. Pudding crust, he says. Made from boiled wheat, mashed apples, and a bit of suet. Got left too long, but it's honest. He cracks a slice free and hands it to you. It's chewy, toasty, a little tart from the apples. Sweet from time. You chew in rhythm with the fire's soft crackle. These were the moments no one documented. No fancy names. No recipes. Just the cook, the fire, the quiet, and a few honest spoonfuls meant for no one in particular. This was the cook's reward. This was the day's coda. Historians call it cook's privilege. But here, now, it feels like closure. You ask what's in the pan. He shrugs. Everything we didn't have. Made into something we did. You sit a while longer. He doesn't speak. You don't need to. Eventually, he hands you a chipped mug of warm water steeped with bay leaf and nutmeg. You drink. It tastes like good sleep and quiet stories. You thank him. He waves you off. Outside, the street is empty. The sky is velvet black. No wind, no birds, just stillness. You tuck your hands into your sleeves, belly heavy but content, and walk with that final taste still lingering on your tongue. There are no carts left, no vendors, no tricks or pies or surprises, just you and deep, old kind of silence. The streets now are barely streets at all, just shadows and stone, where the night settles like a second skin. The echoes of the market have faded into memory, and your footsteps are the only sound you carry. You think you've seen every kind of food this day could offer, but just as you pass under a crooked wooden arch, another scent drifts toward you, faint, soft, familiar. Bread. Freshly baked. At this hour, you follow it. Down an alley, around a corner, into a tiny courtyard where a fire oven glows like a hidden heart. A woman sits on a stool, dusting her arms with flour and pulling around golden loaf from a long-handled peel. She looks up and smiles gently. Can't sleep? You nod. She breaks the loaf with her bare hands, steam curling into the night like breath. It's soft, simple, barely salted, still too warm to be handled without care. She offers you half. You sit beside her. This is the baker's last bread, the one made not for selling, but for the next morning's starters, the kitchen's own hunger, or for no reason at all. You take a bite. It's perfect. Crust crisp and crackling at the edges. Inside soft as candle wax, with a tang that comes from something that's been fermenting slowly and patiently for days. It doesn't need butter, or oil, or company. It just is. You chew slowly. You savor. This bread, she explains, is made from the same dough she sells at sunrise. But this one was left to rise longer, kneaded softer, baked at a whisper. A loaf not made for the crowd, made for the quiet, she says. Historians rarely talk about this kind of bread. They list recipes, weights, grain ratios. But the bread you're eating now, it's not in books, Dot. It's in hands, in patience, in silence. You sip warm water from her kettle. The steam fogs your face. She tears herself a piece, dips it into a bowl of what looks like mashed leeks and herbs. You do the same. It's simple. Just salt, green, and warmth. Dot. It's all you need. Dot. No spices. Dot. No spectacle. Dot. Just real food, built from sleep and fire and old grain. A boy appears at the edge of the courtyard with a small sack of flour. She nods to him. He sets it by the door and disappears again. Dot. It's a rhythm. A life. Quiet, repetitive, slow. You finish your bread. She doesn't ask your name. You don't ask hers. Because this isn't a meal. Dot. It's a benediction. The warmth in your chest is different from the spices or stews or thick puddings. This warmth is earned. Slow, old, meant to last the night. Dot. She gives you a small crust wrapped in cloth. In case you wake before light, you nod. Thank her. Dot. And walk away with bread in your pocket and peace in your bones. The medieval world fed you in many ways today, badly, oddly, cleverly. But here, in the baker's courtyard, it fed you like a lullaby. Dot. No more tricks, just bread. You step back into the street, the cloth-wrapped crust still warm in your hand. There's nothing left to chase now. No sizzling pans, no laughing crowds, no pies stacked like promises. The city is asleep, the kind of sleep that only follows full bellies and long fires, and yet something lingers. You walk without aim now, carried more by memory than motion, until you reach a wide stone arch that frames the edge of the town. Beyond it, hills, wind, and silence, and a small bench. You sit. Let the wind brush your face. Let your body rest against stone that has felt this same tiredness for centuries. Somewhere nearby, a rooster stirs too early. A dog huffs in its sleep, and then, like a trick of the dark, you hear soft chewing. You turn your head. Beside you sits a woman, her face lined but kind. She breaks a flat biscuit in two and offers you half without a word. You accept. Dot. It's dry, crumbly, tastes of oats, bay leaf, and smoke. Dot. She finally speaks. Made it myself, with what I had. You nod, chewing, because of course she did. Everyone did. That was the rule of the day, wasn't it? Make do with what you have. That's what medieval junk food was, in the end. Not nonsense. Not indulgence. Just survival in its most improvised, inventive form. The pigeon in a pie. The almond milk without almonds. The bread that doubled as a bowl. The fish shaped like fruit. The joke desserts. The holy wafers. The rat-shaped lentil loaves. All of it was trying to answer the same question. How do I feed myself today with what little the world allows? And somehow, again and again, they did. You finish the biscuit. You share your crust from the baker. The woman smiles, tucks it in too. Her cloak for later. No. One says goodbye. She walks into the dark. You stay a moment longer, and you remember it all, not just the flavors, but the faces. The way hands passed you warm bowls. The way laughter rose even after the worst bites. The way the food, as odd as it was, made you part of something. You came expecting weird pies. You leave with something else, not kind of reverence. Not for the tea. Cuisine. But for the courage. Because this food wasn't about flavor. It was about facing the day anyway. And sometimes, that's enough. You rise from the bench slowly, every part of you gently heavy, your legs from walking, your shoulders from stillness, your heart from everything you've tasted and learned. The city behind you is now only flickers of orange in the distance, like forgotten embers. The wind is soft. The night is whole. But before you return, before you retreat to wherever you now sleep, you take one last path. Narrow lane winding behind the chapel walls. You expect quiet. You find something stranger. A single table not empty, except for one item. A small wooden plate with an uncut tart, perfectly round, dusted with powdered herbs, and glistening in the moonlight. No one nearby. No sign. Just a note scratched on parchment. For those who endured the whole. You blink. Is this for you? You sit, cut a slice. The crust is firm. Inside, a mash of apple, barley, and thyme, laced with vinegar and honey. Balanced, gentle, the flavors. Don't fight, they lean on each other. No theatrics, no surprise close. Just warmth. It's not delicious. It's resolute. This, it seems, is the final taste. Historians might not write about this tart. It appears in no famous texts, but its ingredients speak of endings. Apples, stored through winter. Barley, hardy and humble. Vinegar, to preserve. Honey, to remember. Thyme, for time. A fringe belief held that foods at the end of a feast should prepare the spirit for rest, neither excite nor sedate, but harmonize. You believe it now. You take another bite. It's soft. Sour. Slightly sweet. Exactly enough. And in this stillness, with the stars blinking patiently above you, you realize this wasn't about discovering the worst food. It was about witnessing the many ways that people refused to starve. How they fried and stretched and salted and sweetened. How they made jokes with marzipan and miracles from moldy bread. How they built whole meals from failure and fed joy to each other anyway. You finished it. Tart. Leave the last slice on the plate, a gift for the next wanderer. And as you step into the dark once more, full in every sense, you don't carry disgust or amusement or even indigestion. You carry respect for the humble. The strange, the stubborn. And for the endless human need to turn what little we have into something worth sharing. You rise from the bench slowly, every part of you gently heavy, your legs from walking, your shoulders from stillness, your heart from everything you've tasted and learned. The city behind you is now only flickers of orange in the distance. Like forgotten embers, the wind is soft. The night is whole. But before you return, before you retreat to wherever you now sleep, you take one last path. Narrow lane winding behind the chapel walls. You expect quiet. You find something stranger. A single table. Empty, except for one item. A small wooden plate with an uncut tart, perfectly round, dusted with powdered herbs, and glistening in the moonlight. No one nearby. No sign. Just a note scratched on parchment. For those who endured the whole. You blink. Is this for you? You sit, cut a slice. The crust is firm. Inside, a mash of apple, barley, and thyme, laced with vinegar and honey. Balanced, gentle, the flavors. Don't fight, they lean on each other. No theatrics, no surprise close. Just warmth. It's not delicious. It's resolute. This, it seems, is the final taste. Historians might not write about this tart. It appears in no famous texts, but its ingredients speak of endings. Apples, stored through winter. Barley, hardy and humble. Vinegar, to preserve. Honey, to remember. Thyme, for time. A fringe belief held that foods at the end of a feast should prepare the spirit for rest, neither excite nor sedate, but harmonize. You believe it now. You take another bite. It's soft. Sour. Slightly sweet. Exactly enough. And in this stillness, with the stars blinking patiently above you, You realize this wasn't about discovering the worst food. It was about witnessing the many ways a people refused to starve. How they fried and stretched and salted and sweetened. How they made jokes with marzipan and miracles from moldy bread. How they built whole meals from failure and fed joy to each other anyway. You finished it. Tart. Leave the last slice on the plate, a gift for the next wanderer. And as you step into the dark once more, full in every sense, you don't carry disgust or amusement or even indigestion. You carry respect for the humble. The strange, the stubborn. And for the endless human need to turn what little we have into something worth sharing. You simply breathe. Let your body go heavy. Let your mind float gently to the edges of the square where voices once shouted and spices once cracked in the air. Feel the warm stone at your back, the softness in your limbs, the faint tingle on your tongue from too much pepper or maybe just time. There's no more clatter, no more vendors. The food is gone. The stories are done. And you, so full of strange sweetness and quiet courage, have earned this rest. Picture a world where even bad food brought people together, where every mistake was made edible, where crumbs were sacred and endings were shared. You're not alone here. You never were. Not among the soups that never stopped boiling, or the pies shaped like animals, or the night cook who gave you broth with no name. You're part of that. Now, one bite at a time, one breath at a time, let it all drift. Now. The eel, jelly. The vinegar apple, the mustard wine. Let it float away, like morning steam over a tired cauldron, and let sleep gather in you. Quiet, warm, certain. You are full. You are safe. You are done.